This is Moral of the Story. Interesting people telling their favorite short stories and then breaking them down to understand what makes them so good. I'm your host, Max Chapovsky. Today's guest is Josh Berson, a tinkerer, mystic, scryer of long horizons, and fashioner of exploratory fictions.
Max,
Trained
it's
as an
frozen.
anthropologist and historian of science, he has held appointments at the likes of the Max Planck Institute for Human Cognitive and Brain Sciences at the Berggruen Institute, where he was the inaugural USC Berggruen Fellow in the transformations of the human. Over the past 10 years, Josh has pioneered an approach to reasoning about the dynamics of human behavior over time horizons of 10 to 100,000 years that integrates insights from linguistic and evolutionary anthropology, philosophy of mind, and philosophy of biology with compositional strategies drawn from fiction and generative sound art. Between 2013 and 2017, concurrent with his time at the Berggruen Institute, Josh served as an advisor to the Dutch design studio Lust. And from 2020 to 2021, he was the chief scientist of the early stage startup Candle, whose mission was to address disinformation by providing information credibility metrics at the point of search. Since then, Josh has served as an advisor to a range of organizations in the futures, health analytics, and venture capital spaces. Not to be outdone with the pen, Josh is the author of multiple book-length monographs, including The Meat Question, released in 2019, which investigates the full sweep of human economic relationships with other gregarious vertebrates, from the Great Rift Valley 3 million years ago to the wet markets of China and Southeast Asia just prior to the pandemic. Josh is pretty sure he's alone in publishing regularly in peer-reviewed venues such as Plus One and comparative studies in society and history, and then fashion and lifestyle magazines including 032C and Jane by the Gray Attic. In his spare time, you'll find him swimming in the cold sea off the Hebrides or geeking out about Casio F91W mods and 32-bit audio recorders, something I can personally attest to from one of our first phone calls when we went off on the long tangent about the pros, cons, frequency responses, and polar patterns of various recording devices. Josh, welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Max.
So you are here to tell us a story. So set the stage. Is there anything that we should know before we get into the story itself?
The one thing I would say before we get into the story proper is that, as we were discussing just prior to coming on, I'm standing now in an apartment that has been the home of my partner, Jesse, for the better part of 20 years. And I did not come on the scene until a little bit more than 9 years ago. But that's enough to set the stage because the story I'm going to tell is a pandemic marriage story.
I love it. All right. Let's get into it. Tell me a story.
Okay. So you mentioned my 2019 book, The Meat Question, and when that book came out, I had just sent in the final draft of what became my 2021 book, The Human Scaffold, and I went to the States to promote the book in late 2019, and then I was in the States doing various book promotion related things into early 2020, just as the pandemic was getting underway. My partner Jesse has permanent residence in Germany. I do not. And at the time I was between visas because I had just spent a year, as you mentioned, in Los Angeles at the Berggruen Institute preparing my third book. And we weren't sure exactly what was going to happen, if I was going to stay on in LA, so I had deferred renewing my visa. So when the European Union closed its frontiers, I was in New York and Jesse had just returned to Germany. And we said, well, we'll see what happens. You know, it's probably not going to last longer than a few weeks, the closure, right? And so I dug down in New York, and meanwhile, Jesse was having really a lovely early pandemic in Germany. They did a very good job in the first wave, and it was a very different experience in Berlin to New York. But then, you know, after the first month, the EU and the German Interior Ministry announced they were renewing the 30-day ban on entries of non-EU nationals. And this went on and on into June, and finally at the end of June, when the guidance from the Bundespolizei had not changed, we consulted an immigration lawyer, and he said, "You're just going to have to get married outside the European Union. That's the only way I can see to make this happen." Now, Jesse and I at this point had been together for 6 years, and we had discussed getting married in the past. We discussed getting married before going to California so that it would be easier to put her on my American health insurance, because it's always just a pain in the ass trying to arrange health insurance. Even though Jessie is a U.S. citizen, she doesn't maintain cover in the U.S. because she spends most of her time elsewhere. And in Germany in particular, she's a member of what's called the KSK, which is a state-sponsored artists union, which provides a very good deal on a group plan for health coverage. So this is not something she has to consider except when she's going to spend an extended period in the States. So we had discussed it then. In Germany, it takes forever to get married. It really takes about 9 months to provide all the documentation. Whereas in Copenhagen, you can go up and do it in a couple days. So we had considered this previously, but for one reason or another had decided to forego the opportunity. And now we were faced with the challenge of finding a suitable venue to get married in the middle of the pandemic. So that's now the first week of July 2020 when I started looking into this. And we considered our options. Jessie could fly to New York, and we could conclude things in about 2 days. But I really didn't want her to have to return to the States if we could avoid that, for a number of reasons, for the health-related reasons, for the long-haul travel reasons, and various family dramas, with who would be invited at this emergency wedding, and so we decided, okay, we'll find some neutral venue, some place that's in Europe but outside the EU. Well, where could that be? Well, the clear choice was the UK. But this presented a number of obstacles. The UK had implemented a system of special purpose marriage visas that we would need. And to get these visas, you have to furnish biometrics with the Home Office. In practice, this turned out to be kind of a joke, but it's one of the obligatory points of passage in the process of getting this special purpose visa. The only problem was all the visa processing centers were closed in New York for the pandemic. And this was just the first in a series of steps, which I'll get to. But very briefly, by chance, I knew the single best visa expediter in the United States, because he had helped me get a visa to teach in China on 2 days' notice a couple of years before, when I was in New York just for 5 days. And in China, you have to get the visa in the place in the US where you have hukou, right? And since I'm registered, so I called him up, and he said, "I don't know, things are kind of crazy right now, but put in your application with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and send me the details about the application number, and we'll see what we can do." So I did as he asked, and he called me a few days later, and he says, "Can you be in Midtown at 7:30 tomorrow morning?" And I said, "Yes, I can." He said, "Okay, you're going to have to pay this many hundreds of dollars to the visa processor, and then bring $500 in cash for the expediter's fee." So I went down and did that and put it in, and we didn't know if it would work. They could have they could have rejected the application, and that was another a couple weeks wait. And then finally the news came that they'd approved my visa, and then I said, "Okay, Jesse, now you have to do the same thing in Berlin, where it was significantly easier." But even so, she said, "If I'd known it would be this much hassle, I would have simply come to New York." I said, "Do you know what I've already been through? And we're just getting started." So then there was the question of, well, where are we going to do the ceremony? In London, because of the lockdown in London in the early part of 2020, all the register offices, all the borough halls had a large backlog of people who had been planning to get married, and now we're waiting, right? And we didn't want to spend hundreds of pounds for the stately room at some random register office when we were only going to be allowed two witnesses anyway. We wanted a basic statutory marriage ceremony. So finding one within a day's train journey of London took 2 weeks of calling around on my part and on the part of my friend Lynn, who lives in Holloway in the borough of Islington, and had agreed to put us up in London. Because the other part of this is that in the UK, there's a 28-day waiting period between when you give notice of your intent to marry and when you can actually do the ceremony. And you cannot give notice until you've been in the country 7 days. If you have to establish this kind of fictive residency if you're coming with a marriage visa from outside the country. So I arranged to fly, and then of course I had to find a place to quarantine in London for 2 weeks. So I found a place in Islington to quarantine, a place I'd stayed previously. So I was going to be there essentially in a 120 square foot flat for 23 and a half hours a day for 15 days. And then as soon as I was done, Jesse would fly in from Berlin, and then I had arranged a date with the Islington Register office to give notice, and then we had found a ceremony at a different Register office for a month later. And I kind of knew, so I kind of knew that something was going to go wrong, and that the weak point, I had an intuition, was going to be this date with Islington Register office. So the day before we were to give notice, I called them and I said, we're coming in tomorrow to give notice. And they said, but you can't possibly, because your partner hasn't been in the country for 7 days. And I said, well, I have it in writing from you from 4 weeks ago that this would be okay. They said, well, there's nothing we can do. I said, well, there'd better be something you can do, because we have this date for the ceremony. And they said, you'll have to get another one. We said, we can't. There's no, we're not staying another 2 months in the country. So they said, well, come in and you can have a new date in 10 days' time to give notice. And then you'll have to submit a petition for a waiver of the 28-day notification period. I said, okay, you're on. So we go into the following week to give notice. And by this time, Lynn has returned from a trip to Scotland where she'd been up wild swimming with an old friend of hers. And she's kind of enrolled Jesse in her wild swimming program. So Jesse is going up to this to Blackfriar Heath every morning to swim in the pond, which was about 60 degrees at the moment, and I'm kind of buckled down in Holloway, trying to do investor calls for the startup you mentioned, Candle, which was also trying to get off the ground at the moment. I'm meeting with a prospective CTO, trying to recruit someone, and in the middle of all this, I'm preparing this letter to the head office of the Register offices of England and Wales, explaining why they had better give us this waiver. So we go in to give notice, and it was fascinating, the kinds of questions they asked to make sure that this was a legitimate marriage, that if we knew one another's places of birth, right? And of course, we're sitting there doing it next to one another. So it's really just a protocol, because if you listened to the first person, you could have got, anyway. Lynn's house Lynn had formed a bubble with her neighbors. There were children running in and out much of the day, because she was conducting a kind of direct action urban rewilding project in the middle of this, which I was supposed to be helping with, right? Where we were trying to push the borough of Islington. We were trying to use the crisis to get the borough of Islington to license the conversion of street parking into gardening allotments, which Lynn had already done in guerrilla fashion, and the borough council had tried on a number of occasions to remove the skips she had placed in the parking spot in front of her home. Right. So eventually she'd posted guard. It turned into this drawn-out direct action program. I was advising her on how on strategy, we needed to get away. So we went to a friend of Jesse's who lives in Devon on the south coast. And Jesse's friend Asher, she knows him from the performance scene in Berlin. He's an old circus arts guy, and he's a bit nuts. And so we take the train out to Totnes, and Asher greets us on the platform with a big hug, and I kind of freak out, right? Because this was just when the so-called variety, the beta variety was in circulation right in that area. So we spend the week at Asher's, and it's and Asher says, are you guys coming to the sauna we're doing tonight? Because he lives out on a farm, and there was a sauna, and I said, no, I'm not going to the sauna, but Jesse went, and I said, okay, you can go to the sauna, but so. Things continued to be a little tense, and then Asher said, would you like to go to the coast? So we drove down to the coast and stripped off and got in the water, which was about 11 degrees Celsius, so say 55 degrees. And it was the most cathartic thing imaginable, right? And then we went back to London to prepare to get married. And just as we were, the government announced London is locking down again. And I said, I do not have it in me to call the Barnet Register office to find out if we're still on for next Monday. You have to do it. So Jesse calls the Register office where we had agreed the ceremony, and they said, "Oh yes, come in with your witnesses." And so we went there the following Monday, the 19th of October, 2020, and it was just the strangest thing, the person who conducted the ceremony just created this remarkably I hesitate to say sacred, but let's say sacred atmosphere in the middle of this very prosaic setting with Lynn and our friend Virginia serving as the witnesses. Jesse and I were, because we had both been viscerally opposed to the very principle of getting married. This was purely an instrumental ploy on our part, so that we could so that I could re-enter Germany with no trouble, and then it happened, and we thought, wow, oh, actually this is kind of interesting. And then we go outside, and Virginia says, oh, didn't you know that that Belgium has just been put on the Koch Institute's red list? You were like the German health. CDC's, right? So if you were planning to take a train back to Berlin and pass through Brussels, change at Brussels, you would have to quarantine when you got back to Berlin. So we celebrated our marriage by canceling our train and booking a flight back to London to Berlin for 2 days thence, and arrived just hours before the Koch Institute placed the UK on its level 3 list or whatever. And then I believe I did not leave the city limits of Berlin for 370 days. Probably that was in 10 years I had not been quite so. I think it was 4 times in the year that followed did I travel more than a half hour's walk from home. But this. That's the story, and I'm happy to discuss what makes it so compelling. I mean, of course, there's a sort of comic element, right? It became an exercise in change management with the Register offices of England and Wales, so they might not have seen it quite that way, but I really what was so unexpected for both of us was that was how fun it was. Not getting married, but being married. Like we felt it right after we went out for a walk, and it was unseasonably warm the following day, and we were staying not far from the coal drop yards. When we went out to this posh mall just to have a look around, and we thought, oh, this is kind of great. And then of course I had to take the train back up to Barnet Register office to pick up the certificate, the piece of paper saying we'd got married, to show the passport control officials in Berlin, because nothing is so important as your papers here. So there you have it. My pandemic wild swimming marriage story.
That is crazy. I probably would have just tried to forge the document. It's not the best approach, but if you knew, so let's look at it like this. If you knew at the beginning what it was going to take and all of the twists and turns, would you have done anything differently? Would you have taken that approach at all?
I probably would have said to Jesse, fly to New York and let's drive up to let's drive up to Woodstock and do it there. I
Oh,
probably, but I'm glad we didn't do that because I'm glad we did it where we did it and how we did it. And uh, I, I'd have to think a bit about why exactly. I'm sure it would have been great no matter what, but but yeah, it's funny you say you would have simply forged the documents because then the following week, when I went to re-register my address, register at this address in Berlin, we went up to the borough hall here in the borough of Pankow, and the first thing the uh, the civil servant who interviewed us said when she looked at our marriage certificate is there's no stempel, there's no stamp, it doesn't feel official. And we said, but they don't give us it's on counterfeit proof paper. It's on the special, paper that with the green message all over it that lights up under UV. So yes, so we might as well have tried to forge it because without the stempel, what good is it? Yeah.
by the way, speaking of the lighting up under UV, we were recently on a flight, and as we're going through the airport, the agent, the TSA agent, we ran into one who was A, in a good mood, and B, had some extra time, I guess. It wasn't a big line. And he was like, hey, do you want to see why I scan your license? I was like, yeah, I'm so curious about all that stuff. He's like, check this out. And he gets out a black light and he shines it on the license, and you see an entirely new pattern light up in UV. And I was like, oh my God, that's insane. So yeah, counterfeiting might seem sort of the easy way out, but yeah, I'm glad that you didn't do it. It's interesting. This is a common refrain that I see from people when they do something, embark on a journey, which seems like it'll probably have some hiccups, but should arrive at its conclusion relatively normally.
Mm,
And then hilarity and chaos ensues, right?
yeah.
They achieve their objective. And at the end of it, when I would ask them if this is a story they share on the podcast, if you would do it all over again, knowing what you knew and all the shit that was going to go down, would you do it? They say two things, which are really interesting. The first is, no, I probably wouldn't have done it. And the second is, but I'm still so glad that I did it and I would not change a thing, right? So the naivete that people have when they embark on certain quests is actually a good thing. It's actually a good thing. Yeah.
But there are two codas I would add to this. One is that halfway through, we're not even halfway. Early on in this process, I'd got the marriage visa, and then Jesse was in the process of getting it, and then suddenly in August of 2020, the German Interior Ministry reversed itself and said, "Oh yes, we will allow partners. We will allow partners who do not have a statutory marriage to enter the
Kidding me.
country." And we decided we need to go ahead because this is gonna keep coming up. It's just gonna make things easier if we have it, and it's gonna be so much easier to do it in the UK than in Germany. We're gonna have to do this eventually. If we keep living this 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 high mileage, ready for action lifestyle. So we should just go ahead. And then the second part is after all this, when we got to Berlin, I was incredibly nervous that there'd be a problem at passport control. And I should add that this wasn't my only. I'd written the Bundespolizei in advance to say this is what we're doing and this is the date we're re-entering Germany. And so
Amazing.
they said, yeah, that's great. Just have the following documentation. Even so, I was, we get to the line, and I had, in addition to the marriage certificate, I had a letter of invitation from a research institute here, which was bringing me on as a courtesy. So I got to the window first, and they looked at my information, and before the visa agent realized that Jesse has a Niederlassungserlaubnis, Jesse has leave to remain in Germany. He assumed that I was that the marriage certificate was so that she could enter with me, and
Oh,
by
that's
virtue of
funny.
my having this the writ from this posh research institute. So we could have even yeah, it's it's possible we didn't need to do any of this exactly, but I'm glad we did it. And we ended up, we both became, prior to that, I grew up on the Atlantic coast and swam in all the time. And Jesse grew up in Salt Lake City and went hiking in the mountains quite a bit. And early on in our relationship, we would go up to Denmark or Scotland, and I'd get in the water, and she'd be shocked, right, that I could swim in water like that. And after this adventure, she was a better cold water swimmer. She had greater tolerance for the 60-degree water than I did. So we got locked into a kind of a dare about cold swimming. So now
Hmm.
we take cold swimming holidays. We went swimming in the Hebrides in September last year. So it's had that added benefit. If nothing else good came of it, we both we could say that we.
So this water, so, call it 55 degrees. You do this without a wetsuit, right?
We don't, well, I wouldn't call it swimming. See, the interesting thing in Devon and more generally in the UK, with the exception of possibly of Cornwall, is that the tides are really shallow. The break is really mild. It's very difficult to do anything you would call swimming or body surfing. You can certainly immerse yourself, right? And we do that, but there's very little opportunity to stay in for an
Hmm.
extended period of time. Certainly in Devon, in South Devon, where we were the in October 2020 and again in August of last year, the 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 shoal is very, the shelf is very stony, so it's not comfortable for walking on the way a sand beach break would, and there's practically
Hmm.
no break. So you almost have to lie down to get yourself completely covered. In the Hebrides, it's a little better, and you can swim. Yeah, I wouldn't say we're staying in for an extended period of time, but I was swimming off the Jersey the shore last month, just briefly, and the water must have been 74, and it felt soupy to me. That felt way too
Okay.
warm now.
So, like, how long would you stay in the Hebrides?
In the
That
have
was
in
sub
let's
60
see.
degree water, right?
No, they're in when we were on the Isle of Egg in 2018 and in July, and on the Isle of Mull in 2022 in September. So the interesting thing is that because of the Gulf Stream, and because of the hysteresis in the solar warming of the water. Actually, September is probably the mildest time of year to go
Hmm.
up there.
Yep.
It wasn't, it's still challenging, if you're, especially when it's pissing rain, and we were staying last year on what's called the Ross of Mull, which is a little peninsula on the southwest corner of the Isle of Mull, and it's not very big. But even so, we were staying on one side, and we had to cross over to the other side to swim. So it was about an hour, 75-minute walk. And some days it was raining, so we'd get togged up in our rain gear and trudge across the island, and then get to the beach and strip down and get in the water. So on this occasion, I must admit, we didn't really stay in. We got in, we got suitably, uh,
Hmm.
our bodies expressed suitable displeasure at our having
Yeah.
put them in this situation. And then and then we got out and ate oatcakes and walked home. Even so, that's a 3.5 hour a 4 hour
Yeah.
adventure in the cold rain.
So
And
it was
you know, and
like a cold plunge.
yeah, it was that was more like a cold plunge. But I'm sure, I would really love to get back to the Isle of Egg in the small isles, which is a bit north of Mull, where there's enough of a break that you can actually get out and swim, and you don't really have to worry about a rip because you're still in the
Hmm.
lee of the next isle out of the Isle of Ross. So I would love to get out there again and spend a month there and get, because at the end of a month, if you do it every day, you'll be getting in and staying in for 20 minutes,
I
which
mean, you certainly get used to it,
yeah,
but at some point there are just there's just human physiology that dictates that water temperature of a certain at a certain level starts to cause hypothermia in an increasingly shorter amount of time. And the reason I ask you about the swimming piece of it is because I just did my first Olympic triathlon at the end of July,
congratulations.
and I started training. So it's about a mile swim, and I
Hmm.
started training for it by swimming in the pool in February, and then March and April, and then as Lake Michigan started to warm up a little bit, I got a wetsuit, and I thought, hey, since I'll be swimming outdoors, at least I need to get a few swims in Lake Michigan. And then I started fanatically monitoring the temperatures in Lake Michigan
Yeah,
and doing all this research because I'd never done a triathlon before. And I wasn't much of a swimmer before this. And I remember looking at whether it was 62 or 63 degrees,
yeah,
63
yeah,
or 64.
yeah,
Like every degree makes a difference. And nevertheless, the first time that I got in to the water with my wetsuit on, I do remember it was a little bit of a shock because with a wetsuit, as you know, the water has to come in to the wetsuit and then it stays between your skin
right.
and the neoprene and it warms up and that serves as a buffer between you and the water. And that first swim, even so, I started to get a little warmer, but every degree matters.
Yeah,
And from everything that I read, people still don't go if it's under 60 and they have a wetsuit. So I've done the cold plunges before, in 40 some odd degree water for a minute,
yeah.
maybe 2 minutes. But swimming in anything under 60 without a wetsuit, I just have mad respect for that. And maybe that's crazy. Maybe the listeners are going to say, well, I can swim with a wetsuit in, water that's in the mid 50s. That's just not me. That's crazy.
I wouldn't put myself in this category, at least not yet. I've realized over the past half year that open water swimming is really important to me, and I'm determined to do quite a lot of it over the next 10 years. And I have a friend who lives in London, and they have a place out in Wales, and he went through an episode of cancer around 10 years ago when he was 50. And when he recovered, he decided, okay, I'm one of the ways I'm going to mark my recovery is by becoming a very strong open water swimmer. And since then, he has swum a channel relay, right? And so
How long
yeah,
is that? What's the
I don't
distance?
know how long his link was, but for that, people coat themselves in in petroleum products to stay warm, and I don't know if I'll ever get to that stage. Joan Didion writes in Quiet Days in Malibu, the final essay in her 1978 collection, The White Album, about she's describing the career lifeguards in on the coast of Malibu, and how they were required at that time to take a 1 hour swim in the ocean every day, and if the water was below, I think 57 degrees, they were allowed to use a wetsuit. But and there was one
Crazy.
day where she, her principal um, informant, the person she's profiling, She says the water, the water on this day was 58 degrees, and he did not,
Ooh.
he swam in his regulation trunks. So it's it's the most interesting thing is what it does to you feel the metabolic change, right? You feel this incredible, this inner fire for a day afterward. Just before
Yep.
when I just arrived at Lynn Friedley's house in Holloway, waiting for Jesse to arrive, and Lynn was about to go up to Scotland to do this wild swimming holiday. She was baking. She was doing a lot of baking to take up to her friend there, and one of the things she baked was essentially this a babka or a yeast cake, but she enhanced it by with a layer of marzipan at the center. And she said, "Yes, this is a very good high energy food for when you're swimming in the lochs, because the lochs are even colder than the ocean up there." And I said, "Yeah, I bet. There's this incredibly dense cake with almond
Oh
meal
yeah.
at the center
You
will
gotta
will
eat a lot and but not too close to the swim.
yeah."
So I just looked it up. So between the water temperature is between 50 and 60. To reach exhaustion or unconsciousness is 1 to 2 hours, and the expected time of survival is 1 to 6 hours. Pretty wide range because you're talking about 10 degrees and the
Yeah.
physiology and fitness level of the swimmer. But that is crazy to me. Although I will say it does say that between 60 and 70 degrees, it's 2 to 7 hours exhaustion or unconsciousness, and 2 to 40 hours expected time of survival. So that's a pretty wide range.
The
But
the other thing that makes a big difference is how much you're getting in and out. I one of the in my third book, The Human Scaffold, there's a passage, and it started almost as it grew out of something I wrote one morning in late in 2018 in a fit of absent-mindedness, but it's become kind of the key set piece in the book about the physiology of cold water apnea diving. And this is something that as practiced in Japan and Korea, mainly by it's mainly a women's subsistence practice. And I got into it because there's a controversy in the Anthropology of Tasmania, where it's about why Tasmanians included or excluded certain things from their toolkit and so on. And one prominent investigator in this debate makes disparaging remarks about abalone diving as it was practiced by women in Tasmania at the time of the European invasion. About how the fact that this was a major subsistence practice clearly demonstrates that something had gone wrong, that there had been some kind of maladaptive devolution in Tasmanian subsistence culture, and uh, and disavows knowledge of comparable traditions in other parts of the world that might be used as a basis for comparative ethnography. But of course, there are comparable traditions. The Amasan of Japan and the Henyo of Jeju Island and Ippo and Gyeonggi and Busan in Korea. And so I started looking into this when I was finishing the second chapter of The Human Scaffold. And it turns out there's quite a lot of research that's been done on the physiology of the Amasan and Henyo from before they started using wetsuits and modern equipment, because the US Navy was interested and commissioned a conference in 1965 on this theme. So, for example, you can read all sorts of interesting things about the cutaneous cold tolerance and subcutaneous adiposity of Korean women who were diving for abalone off Jeju Island in the 1960s. Their median age, and so but it's quite remarkable. The
so you
just
can
the
train it then?
you can train it. You have to start early. You have to start early for the emotional training as much as anything else. I mean, traditionally, girls would start diving, in 2 to 3 meters of water at the age of 10, so that by the time they were 18 or so, they could be diving in 10 meters of water. And then there are certain traditions in Japan where you go out with a dive boat, and you wear a weighted belt so you can get down to 20 meters, right? But the most traditional method in Korea, practiced among the Henyose of Jeju Island, is you're not diving very deep. You're diving maybe 5 meters and then surfacing repeatedly. And that repeated surfacing and diving has a has is exerts a barotrauma in and of itself, right? And also a vascular trauma, right? You'd be this repeated um, tachycardia, if speeded up heartbeat followed by bradycardia, lowered heartbeat. It takes a toll on the body over a long period of time, over years and decades that you practice it. But it is at the same time, there is something very, very particular about the the sensation of relief, the clarity that comes from getting in water that your body is telling you is really, really too cold to be.
Have you seen the Deepest Breath documentary on Netflix?
I have not. I have not.
It's a free diving documentary
Right.
about how people pursue world records. They do it in warmer waters, but I honestly, so my wife was watching it and I was kind of coming in and out of the room. That thing really messed with me
Yeah.
because when you watch how far down they go, and what's crazy is past a certain point, the pressure starts pulling you down. So you
Yeah.
don't actually have to try very hard. But the flip side of that coin is when you reach the bottom, you have to go extra hard and you have to sort of leave this really sort of hellish gravity field of the depth of the water, and you have to kick with all your might, by which point your oxygen
Yeah.
stores are depleted, the CO2 is filling up your lungs, and when people start having convulsions as they reach, the final 10, 20 meters, and the safety divers have to grab them, and then they surface, and there's cameras at the surface, and you just watch this person who is unconscious and just these empty facial expressions. Dude, I couldn't watch that. Like that to me, like they look like they're dying, right?
Yeah.
And so to me, I have so much respect for that sport, for the people that do that, because it's not like you're running on a treadmill and you can get off at any time and be fine. It's
Yeah.
not like you're doing a lap around the block, you can always stop. It's like you're going to a foreign environment, an
Yeah.
alien ecosystem. And the only way back to survive is to fight your way back once your energy is already depleted. I can't get my mind around that. Like that just, and then to add to that, the temperature of the water, which to your point, obviously there is this reflex, like if we're under the shower and water gets cold, the reflex is to inhale,
Yeah.
right? And what it does to your body, to your point with a faster heartbeat that is slower, the slowing of the heartbeat, it's actually both terrifying and incredible that the human body is capable of that. Just both of those feelings, you know?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I could, I would be a terrible, free diver, in part because I only have an inner ear on one side. I would be subject to really terrible disorientation, alternabaro, vertigo. Uh,
Why do
Um,
you only have inner ear on one
Oh,
side?
it's for congenital. The ear on the side you can see it's only partly formed on the outside, and there's no inner ear. The semicircular canals are rudimentary. There are no otoliths. My sense of balance depends on visual cues and proprioceptive cues from the shoulders and arms,
Hmm.
but also on what I can derive from the the vestibular apparatus on this side. So if you can get when you're coming up, you if the pressure changes in one ear before the other, it can be very disorienting. So I would so
I could
um,
see
so
that.
I grant that I'm off the hook for free diving, but I'm determined to to be able to swim in the 60-degree water with something approaching pleasure. So,
I mean, I will say this. My dad had years ago what we believe was a localized stroke in one of his ears. And so he
mhm.
lost the hearing in that ear. The hearing in his other ear got a lot better. The
Mm,
senses made up for it, as physicians and scientists have known for years. Our other senses just make up for it. Somebody who's born blind just has incredibly accurate, much more than the average person, hearing and a sense of smell and touch. So, for what it's worth, there's obviously some benefit there. I want to go back to the story for a bit. That was a really sort of freewheeling and unexpected, unexpectedly complex narrative.
yes.
So the question I have for you is, looking back on it now, what is the moral of that story?
Oh, I guess I should have seen this one coming, given the name of the podcast. Well, there are a bunch of there are a bunch of morals one could take away. One is that um, okay, the sweetest moral, the most generous moral I'll offer is to temper one's cynicism, because we both were and we remain cynics about the institution of marriage. I'm still of the opinion that marriage ought to be disestablished. That the state that you should be able to register a domestic household with whomever you please, and that the state should not be in the business of 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 consecrating intimate unions in particular, right? But but Jessie was getting on her end before she left Berlin from her from a circle of friends, all of whom come out of the avant-garde Berlin conceptual dance scene, and you'd think they'd be are kind of archetypally anti-capitalist, anti everything, right? And they for them this was an incredible Sex in the City type storyline that they were determined to write Jessie into, despite just and so by the time she got to London, she was already ready not to be done with the whole thing, and so we were aligned, if on nothing else, than on the fact that this was 100% an instrumental gesture. We were pandering to the requirements of the German Interior Ministry. And yet the moment it happened, we thought, oh, this is kind of cool. Something felt different. And I give credit to um, to, uh, the ceremonialist at Barnet Register Office who, who, um, who, who, um, whose illocutionary act, consecrated our relationship in the eyes of the state, for creating this scene. But it's so the one moral is temper your cynicism, because even the most instrumental gesture can end up evoking um, something of sentimental value. Another moral is um, don't undertake. Another moral is think carefully before you undertake some complex diplomatic maneuver for the thinking that it's going to make a good story. I mean, we saw. I certainly I don't know about Jessie, because she didn't see all the complexities that I was seeing on the New York end. But I saw going in, okay, this is going to be a pain in the ass, but boy, will it be a great story. But but it was it. But the value of the story is rarely worth the pain, especially given the level of uncertainty we were dealing with, where 3 days before we were to get married, we wondered if the register offices were about to shut down again. But I would say, what I would what I would say to the listeners, what I would ask them to take away is temper your cynicism. That's all. I'll put the 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 sweetest spin on it.
Well, look, if you're leading and aspiring to continue to lead this sort of nomadic lifestyle, the longer stints in some cities notwithstanding, that that just comes with adventure, right? And I think the one of the signature traits of any adventure is uncertainty. Otherwise, it wouldn't be an adventure, right? If it's predictable, it's not really an adventure. And so, to me, this created the uncertainty of it all, and the twists and turns are what created its essence. What, when distilled, resulted in the essence of adventure. And the thing about uncertainty is it can make us uncomfortable. Sometimes it makes me uncomfortable, and I love adventure. Sometimes it makes me uncomfortable, but at the same time, that's what makes a good story, right?
Yeah.
Like yesterday, I took my family and another family on a boat to a group called the Chain of Lakes, and we got a pontoon boat. And it's been a very long time since I drove a boat, but I was like, yeah, I can drive this boat, and everything was fine. Everything was good. We had 10 people on the boat, 5 adults, 5 kids, and then we had to dock for lunch, and the place was pretty packed because it was Labor Day, and I had to find a way to dock, this boat. And I came close to a couple of other boats a couple of times.
Yeah.
It got a little shaky. So I was nervous, but at the same time, I'll look back on that day and think nothing but what a hell of an adventure. Everybody had
Yeah.
fun. Everybody sort of enjoyed themselves, and we did have some moments of uncertainty, but it turned out okay. So let's talk about storytelling for a minute.
Mm.
What in your mind do good stories have in common?
Hmm. Most good stories, most good stories, like most good works of music, or most good works of organized sound, let's say, entail the creation of tension, and then its resolution, or its partial resolution, right? It's funny. I was having a very similar conversation with an editor not long ago, who who um, who chided me for, in their view, for being a bit too effulgent, with the ending of a work, and said, you want the readers to come away feeling that their questions have been answered. And I said, well, to my way of thinking, framing the quality of the reading experience in those terms, it forecloses on a broader field of possibility of what reading, or what storytelling should be for. Is it for the asking of questions, which are then resolved in some kind of satisfactory way, or are there more exploratory options? And I lean toward those more exploratory options, right? Toward that storytelling should be a way of allowing us to open up further, to practice resisting closure, to practice sitting with an abiding uncertainty, right, for
Mhm.
longer. At the same time, if you never have any release, if you keep introducing tension into the story, and you don't at least have partial cadences, moments where it resolves, or where the listener or reader can release the tension that they've taken into their own bodies, then it just becomes, it becomes an endurance exercise. I listen since we've been talking about audiophily. I've been listening lately to some of Toshimoto Nakamura's no input mixing board stuff, and so
Okay.
essentially, yeah, a recent discovery on my part, but essentially, he just has a line plugged from the line out to the line in of his mixing board, and he's learned over a period of 20 years or more to manipulate the feedback to create all kinds of effects. So he's creating something out of nothing, and some of it is very musical, and some of it is very noisy. And of course, the real connoisseurs of this stuff prefer the noisier stuff. They don't want the ear candy. They don't want the stuff that 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 appears to be cleaving too closely to established conventions of musicality. So there's a fine line when you can learn to cultivate your tolerance for unresolved tension, right? And maybe that's a form of opening up. But to my way of thinking, a good story will create tension, but at least partly and ongoingly resolve some of that tension, but not all
Yeah,
of it.
that makes perfect sense. I agree. Otherwise, if you leave it too unresolved, the audience might get a little angry with you. Maybe it's their discomfort. Who knows? But that's a really good point. So, last question, Josh. If you could say one thing to your 20-year-old self, what would it be?
Oh my goodness. We're here such a brief time. That's that's what we're here such a brief time. Don't worry. Don't be less concerned. Don't be too concerned about creating a a secure context for yourself or others. About establishing something and getting there and just holding very still and not disturbing something. We're here such a brief time. The Whatever uncertainty you feel now, is nothing compared to the uncertainty you're going to feel later. So you might as well do something interesting. You might as well try to leave some kind of trace that that will be meaningful to people, or some other things that we don't think of as people, but meaning makers, meaning, but to interpreters of traces, so long after you're gone, after we're gone, because yeah, we're here a brief time.
You might as well. What a great way to look at it. Because you're right, we are here for a very short time, and most of the things we think matter do not. Not in the grand scheme of things, not even in our own life. So, very sage advice. Well, that does it. Josh Berson, polymath, wordsmith, philosopher, writer, water swimmer, nomad. Thank you for being on the show.
Max, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Of course. For show notes and more, head over to mosspod.org. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast on. This was Moral of the Story. I'm Max Strapowski. Thank you for listening. Talk to you next time.